for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
Welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host today. We have a lot of topics to discuss, including Vice President Kamala Harris has picked her running mate. We will tell you who that is in just a few minutes. We have election results from Michigan and a couple of other states as primaries were done across the country earlier this week. We have to talk about the influence of AIPAC and why they're buying elections, and we're going to call them out. AIPAC's actually going to be our Hammer Time segment this week. So we've got a lot of varied topics to discuss today, most of it political. So before we get into today's show, a couple of reminders. You can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on X at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, X, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, and KZGM in Kabul, Missouri. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. If they're not carrying us, please call and ask them very nicely to do so. We would appreciate it. We are recording this show on Wednesday, August 7th, 2024. Let's get to our very first story here. This is Will Weissert, Sung Min Kim, Colleen Long, Steve Karnowski, and Zeke Miller writing for the Associated Press. This is dated August 6th out of Philadelphia. Kamala Harris introduced Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to the nation at a raucous rally Tuesday in Battleground, Pennsylvania that was aimed at building momentum for the newly minted Democratic presidential ticket in the sprint toward Election Day. While standing with Walz in Philadelphia, Harris said, quote, "He is the kind of person who makes people feel like they belong and then inspires them to dream big. That's the kind of vice president America deserves," end of quote. Taking the microphone after Harris, Walz revved up the crowd for the rigorous campaign to come. He said, quote, "We've got 91 days. My God, that's easy. We'll sleep when we're dead," end of quote. I love Tim Walz. He just very down-to-earth, very homey guy. I mean, just down-home, Midwestern, middle-of-the-road dude who likes progressives, apparently. He's done a lot of things, free meals for kids at school, codifying the right to have an abortion into the Minnesota State Constitution, or codified it into law there, trans rights, you name it, he's done it. The remarks reflected the urgency of the moment, with Harris tapping Walz for the ticket during one of the most turbulent periods in modern American politics. Republicans have rallied around Donald Trump after he was targeted in an attempted assassination in July. Just days later, President Joe Biden ended his re-election campaign, forcing Harris to scramble to unify Democrats and decide on a running mate over a breakneck 2-week stretch. In choosing the 60-year-old Walz, Harris is elevating a Midwestern governor, military veteran, and union supporter who helped enact an ambitious Democratic agenda for his state, including sweeping protections for abortion rights and generous aid to families. And by the way, did that with a 1-vote majority in the state Senate. It was her biggest decision yet as the Democratic nominee, and she went with a broadly palatable choice, someone who says politics should have more joy and who deflects dark and foreboding rhetoric from Republicans with a lighter touch, a strategy that the campaign has been increasingly turning to since Harris took over the top spot. Harris hopes Walz will help her shore up her campaign standing across the upper Midwest, a critical region in presidential politics that often serves as a buffer for Democrats seeking the White House. The party remains haunted by Trump's wins in Michigan and Wisconsin in 2016. Trump lost those states in 2020, but has zeroed in on them as he aims to return to the presidency this year and is expanding his focus to Minnesota. Since Walz was announced, the team raised more than $20 million from grassroots donations, and we can actually now confirm that the number is $32 million. That was in a 24-hour period. Walz is far from a household name. An ABC News Ipsos survey conducted before he was selected, but after vetting began, showed that nearly 9 in 10 U.S. adults did not know enough to have an opinion about him. Harris devoted much of her speech to telling the audience about Walz's life and work, which included stints as a social studies teacher and a football coach. She said, quote, "To those who know him best, Tim is more than a governor. We both believe in lifting people up, not knocking them down. We both know that the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And we see in our fellow Americans neighbors, never enemies." End of quote. Harris, the first black person and person of South Asian descent to lead a major party ticket, initially considered nearly a dozen candidates before zeroing in on a handful of serious contenders. Trump has focused much of his campaign on appealing to men, emphasizing a need for strength in national leadership, and even featuring wrestler and noted racist Hulk Hogan on the final night of the Republican National Convention. Harris's finalists, all white men, marked an acknowledgement of the Democrats' need to at least try to win over some of that demographic. She personally interviewed 3 finalists: Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, thank God they passed on him, Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, and Tim Walz. Harris wanted someone with executive experience who could be a governing partner, and Walz also offered appeal to the widest swath of the diverse coalition. His selection drew praise from lawmakers as ideologically diverse as Progressive Leader Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York, and Independent Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, a moderate who left the Democratic Party earlier this year. A team of lawyers and political operatives led by former Attorney General Eric Holder pored over documents and conducted interviews with potential selections. Harris mulled the decision over on Monday with top aides and finalized it Tuesday morning. That is according to 3 people familiar with Harris's decision who spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe private deliberations. Shapiro, an ambitious politician in his own right, struggled with the idea of being number 2 at the White House and said he felt he had more to do in Pennsylvania, according to one of the people familiar with Harris's decision. There was also very public pushback to Shapiro for his stance on Israel from Arab American groups and younger voters angry over the administration's response to the Israel-Hamas war. The other contenders threw their support behind the ticket Tuesday, and Shapiro was one of the speakers at Tuesday's Philadelphia rally. Biden described the Harris and Walz ticket as, quote, "a powerful voice for working people in America's great middle class," end of quote. Walz coined one of Democrats' buzziest campaign bits to date, calling Trump and his running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, quote, "just weird," end of quote, a label that the Democratic Governors Association, of which Walz is chairman, amplified in a post on X, and Democrats more broadly have echoed. On Tuesday, Walz said, quote, "just an observation of mine, I just have to say it. These guys are creepy and yes, just weird as hell," end of quote. Harris, second gentleman Doug Emhoff, and Walz will spend the next 5 days touring critical battleground states, visiting Wisconsin and Michigan on Wednesday, which the Michigan visit is about to happen here very quickly, and Arizona and Nevada later in the week. By the way, the Michigan visit, they had over 50,000 people wanting tickets. They had to move the rally to an airport hangar to get all the people in. So there you go, folks. Wow. Vance, for his part, planned stops in some of the same areas. He said Tuesday that he called Walz earlier in the day and left a voice message. The Trump campaign on Tuesday immediately tried to tag Walz as a far-left liberal. Caroline Leavitt, Trump's campaign press secretary, or should be Trump's mouthpiece liar, because all they do is lie. She said, quote, "It's no surprise that San Francisco liberal Kamala Harris wants West Coast wannabe Tim Walz as her running mate. Walz has spent his governorship trying to reshape Minnesota in the image of the Golden State." End of quote. Trump, who often weighs in on news on his social media network, posted simply, "Thank you," after the news of Walz's selection was public. He followed up with another post a few hours later proclaiming, quote, "This is the most radical left duo in American history." End of quote. Really? No, it isn't. No, it isn't. Trump also suggested that Biden, quote, "feels that he made a historically tragic mistake," end of quote, and would try to get back in the race again. Really? No, that ain't gonna happen either, Donnie. Walz, who grew up in the small town of West Point, Nebraska, was a teacher, coach, and union member at Mankato West High School in Minnesota before entering politics. He won the first of 6 terms in Congress in 2006 from a mostly rural southern Minnesota district and used the office to champion veterans' issues. Walz served 24 years in the Army National Guard, rising to command sergeant major, one of the highest enlisted ranks in the military, although he didn't complete all the training before he retired, so his rank for benefits purposes was set at master sergeant. He ran for governor in 2018 on the theme of One Minnesota and won by more than 11 points. 46-year-old David Ivory, a St. Paul resident, rode over to Walz's residence on his bike with his kids shortly after the announcement to deliver their congratulations. Ivory said, quote, "He's just down to earth. He gets it. He can talk to anybody. He doesn't seem like he's above anybody." End of quote. As Governor, Walz had to find ways to work in his first term with a legislature split between a Democratic-controlled House and a Republican-led Senate. Minnesota has a history of divided government, though, and the arrangement was surprisingly productive in its first year. Walz easily won re-election in 2022, and Democrats flipped the Senate to win full control of both chambers and the governor's office for the first time in 8 years. A big reason was the Dobbs decision from the conservative majority Supreme Court that overturned a federal right to an abortion. Walz currently serves as co-chair of the Bipartisan Council of Governors, advising the president and the cabinet on homeland security and national defense issues. He was first appointed to the position by Trump, then later reappointed by Biden. So there you go, folks. Tim Walz seems like he's a really decent man, and I have a feeling that that's going to garner a lot of votes this November. 90 days ahead, and I hope it happens. I really hope it happens. And for the progressives out there that are still whining and complaining about Palestine this and Palestine that, I'm going to just bluntly tell you, I just don't care what's happening over there above what's happening here in this country, because we can control what happens over here. We can't control what happens overseas, and we should not. Which goes back to my point of we need to stop funding Israel. We really do, folks. We need to get out of their business. We really do, and we really need to get out of everybody's business. It really is that simple. Yes, there needs to be a Palestinian state. Yes, the land was stolen from Palestinians. Should violence be part of the solution? Absolutely not. And that's violence on both sides. Israel wants to start a genocide, I'll just be blunt, and get rid of all Palestinians. You get Trump in there, you guarantee he's going to say, put the pedal to the metal to Netanyahu. Now, he's already said he's going to do that. So don't sit there and whine to me about lesser of two evils, lesser of two. We tried that in 2016 with Jill Stein, and it didn't work. It ain't going to work until the two-party system is down to about 5 or 6 or 7 parties. It's just not going to happen. We need major reform here at home first before we start major reform elsewhere in the world. It really is that simple, folks. It really is. As a matter of fact, let's get to some more election stuff here. This was a bad night for Ottawa Impact, and I love it. This is Audra Gamble writing for MLive in the Grand Rapids Press. This is dated August 7th out of Ottawa County, Michigan. In a hectic night for voters watching Ottawa County primary election results roll in, the ultra-conservative group Ottawa Impact has lost its majority on the County Board of Commissioners. The Ottawa County election results webpage crashed around 9:20 p.m. due to a large influx of visitors, according to the clerk's office. From that point onward, the website's functionality was spotty, often displaying errors for voters checking in on races, but fully came back online around 10:45 p.m. As results rolled in, it became clear that even if all the Ottawa Impact candidates who won their primaries win in the general election in November, the group will still have at most 4 of the 11 seats on the Board of Commissioners. Both Ottawa Impact co-founders Joe Moss and Sylvia Rodea won their Republican primaries in District 5 and 8 respectively, along with Ottawa Impact and members Allison Miedema in District 11 and Kendra Wenzel in District 6. But Ottawa Impact Commissioners Gretchen Cosby in District 1 and Roger Belknap in District 9 lost their primary elections to more traditional Republican candidates. Former recalled Ottawa Impact Commissioner Lucy Ebel also lost her primary race in District 2 as well. Voters also favored more traditional Republicans for countywide positions of power. With all precincts fully reporting, voters across Ottawa County preferred more moderate, traditional establishment Republicans for the countywide elected official positions over those Republicans aligned with Ottawa Impact. There are no Democrats running for prosecutor, sheriff, or treasurer, so the winners of the Republican primary win those seats outright. Current Chief Assistant Prosecutor Sarah Matajwik won against challenger Greg Todd, 39,289 votes to 26,632. In the sheriff's race, current Undersheriff Eric DeBoer won against challenger and current interim county administrator John Anderson, 39,939 votes to 26,498. Current county treasurer Cheryl Clark beat challenger Ben Genzer for the job, 40,523 votes to 24,280. So, bad night for Ottawa Impact. Hopefully they're on their way out come November. Vote Democratic. I love it. Oh my God, I love it. Something that I don't love that we need to talk about right now is our Hammer Time segment.
Hammer Time!
Yes, it is indeed Hammer Time. It is time to drop the hammer on the Douchebag of the Week. And this week, the Douchebag Award goes to the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC. They're a super PAC. So we're going to roast them a little bit here. I have this story. This is Nick Robertson writing for The Hill. This is dated August 7th. Listen to this, folks. Cori Bush is not somebody to be messed with. Representative Cori Bush, Democrat of Missouri, vowed revenge on a top pro-Israel PAC after she lost the primary in her re-election campaign Tuesday. The group boosted her opponent in a tightly contested race, knocking off a second member of the Progressive Squad this cycle. The American Israel Political Affairs Committee's Super PAC United Democracy Project was a top funder of Bush's opponent, St. Louis County District Attorney Wesley Bell. Bush was harshly criticized for her outspoken criticism of Israel's war in Gaza. Bush said in a fiery speech after her loss that leaving Congress will only take some strings off. Quote, because now there are some strings that I have attached, and as much as I love my job, all they did was radicalize me, and now they should be afraid. End of quote. She continued, quote, they're about to see this other Cori, this other side. There is nothing that happens in my life that happens in vain. So this happened because it was meant to happen. And let me say, it's because of the work that I need to do. And let me say this, AIPAC, I'm coming to tear your kingdom down. End of quote. When she said that, there was a response with a lot of cheering. The squad member has called the ongoing Gaza war Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign, and earlier this year introduced the Ceasefire Now resolution. Some of her rhetoric has been met with backlash from other congressional members, but also constituents in her own district. When he announced his campaign, Bell said, quote, I think her comments show a lack of understanding of the nuance and complexities of an issue that's literally hundreds of years in the making. End of quote. No, you don't understand, bub. According to Sludge, AIPAC helped raise 2/3 of the campaign funding for Bell. The United Democracy Project spent more than $7 million to oust Bush. Bush is the second squad member to lose a primary this cycle after Representative Jamal Bowman, Democrat of New York, was also defeated by an opponent that received significant support from AIPAC. After his loss last month, some progressives sounded the alarm over the group's influence. Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said after Bowman's defeat, quote, I think we need to have a real conversation about the AIPAC, end of quote. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And we need to have some congressional hearings over this. We need to get rid of dark money in elections. We need to get rid of all money in elections. The group is controversial in some Democratic circles because it has boosted conservative candidates throughout its history, and some of its funding comes from top GOP donors. Ocasio-Cortez, who won her primary the same night Bowman lost, said, quote, I think that what we do need to have a real conversation about is how a Republican, primarily Republican and largely Republican-financed organization is playing and dumping money and playing an extremely divisive role in the Democratic Party. End of quote. Tuesday's primary result, combined with Bowman's loss, slims the squad's roster from 9 to 7 members of Congress. The group's original 4 members, elected together in 2018, are expected to remain. AIPAC has pushed back on the accusation that is trying to sow discord among Democrats by inserting itself into primaries, telling The Hill earlier this year that it is, quote, the largest PAC contributor to Democratic candidates, end of quote. The group said in a statement, quote, our political action committee supports the Democratic leadership in nearly half of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Black Caucus, and Hispanic Caucus. In addition, our affiliated super PAC supported a number of Democratic progressive candidates in the last election cycle who defeated anti-Israel candidates in their primary, won their general election, and are currently serving in Congress. We believe that it is entirely consistent with progressive values to stand with the Jewish state. End of quote. No, it isn't. Not even close. Not even close. I'm a progressive and I stand with the squad. You can guarantee that there, AIPAC. So to AIPAC, we have this message for you.
Don't be a douchebag.
That's right. You need to stop interfering in elections and stop being a douchebag to actual progressives. Oh my God. I get so pissed about this. You can't understand how pissed I get. All right, let's get to some more election news. This is Joey Capoletti writing for the Associated Press. This is dated August 7th out of Lansing. We have some statewide results here. Former U.S. Representative Mike Rogers has secured the Republican nomination for a U.S. Senate seat in Michigan and will face Democratic Representative Alyssa Slotkin in the November election. Slotkin and Rogers, both long considered the frontrunners for their respective party nominations, will now shift focus to the general election. Slotkin enters with a massive fundraising advantage and emerges nearly unscathed from a sparse primary, while Rogers has the backing of national Republican groups and Donald Trump. Slotkin defeated actor Hill Harper in the Democratic primary. Republicans chose Rogers over former U.S. Representative Justin Amash and physician Sherry O'Donnell. Both candidates will now compete for a seat left open by longtime Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow's retirement. Sandy Pensler was also on the ticket for the Republicans. However, he dropped out of the race a couple of weeks ago and endorsed Mike Rogers. The retiring incumbent joined Slotkin on stage at an event in Detroit shortly after the race was called to endorse her. Slotkin praised Stabenow for her years of service before delivering a speech positioning herself as the normal and rational candidate. Let me tell you the truth about Alyssa Slotkin. She has voted several times against the Democratic Party. She is not a progressive. She is a centrist candidate. Period. End of story. North of Detroit in Oakland County, Rogers thanked supporters at a watch party for not giving up on politics, which is a direct quote. Like Slotkin, Rogers represented a mid-Michigan swing district in Congress, and he similarly positioned himself as the common sense candidate in his speech. No Republican has won a U.S. Senate race in Michigan since 1994, when the people were stupid enough to vote for Spence Abraham. Old Spencer Abraham himself. With Democrats holding a razor-thin majority in the Senate and Republicans in the House, competitive races like those in Michigan have drawn lots of attention. The state's status as a key presidential swing state raises the stakes for those seats even higher, with party control on the line from the top of the ballot all the way down to the state legislature. Michigan's open Senate seat is one of a handful of races nationwide that will determine control of the upper chamber in November. With a later congressional primary, Slotkin and Rogers will have a short period to transition from competing against their own party members to appealing to a broader base of voters for the November 5th general election, which may explain why they have campaigned with their eyes on the general election. National groups on both sides have already reserved millions of dollars worth of advertisements after the primary. Both Slotkin and Rogers, viewed for months as the overwhelming favorites in their primaries, have skipped debates and refrained from holding large campaign events. Several U.S. House seats with primaries on Tuesday could influence the balance of power in the lower chamber, but there, too, the biggest battles will be fought in the fall campaign. Slotkin's entry into the Senate race left her mid-Michigan 7th congressional district seat open, historically one of the nation's top battleground districts. Both party candidates ran unopposed in their primaries there, setting the table for a November matchup between Democrat Curtis Hurdle Jr. and Republican Tom Barrett. Democratic U.S. Representative Dan Kildee's retirement will leave an open seat in the 8th Congressional District, which extends northward from the outskirts of Detroit and covers areas such as Flint, Saginaw, and Midland. First-term State Senator Kristen McDonald Rivet, who has been endorsed by Kildee, defeated State Board of Education President Pamela Pugh and Matt Collier, the former mayor of Flint, to secure the Democratic nomination. On the Republican side, former TV anchor Paul Jung defeated Mary Draves, a former chemical manufacturing executive at Dow, and Anthony Hudson to win the GOP nomination. Jung lost to Kildee by over 10 percentage points in 2022. Meanwhile, several incumbents in battleground districts now have their November matchups set following Tuesday's primaries. U.S. Representative Hillary Scholten, who in 2022 became the first Democrat to represent Grand Rapids in decades, will face Paul Hudson, an attorney who defeated Michael Markey Jr. in the Western Michigan District's GOP primary. A district just north of Detroit will see a rematch between freshman GOP Representative John James and Carl Marlinga, a longtime Macomb County prosecutor who defeated 3 other Democrats in the primary. Marlinga lost to James by 1,600 votes, and National Democrats have made the seat a top target this cycle. In a heavily Democratic district encompassing downtown Detroit, U.S. Representative Sri Tanadar defeated Detroit City Council member Mary Waters, who had been endorsed by Mayor Mike Duggan. Tanadar significantly outraised her, and his win leaves Detroit, a city that is nearly 80% black, without black representation in Congress for a second consecutive term. Tanadar is also not a progressive either. He's a rich dude. Down-ballot races held primaries across the state on Tuesday. Control of the State House of Representatives will be at stake in November, with all 110 seats up for election. Democrats took control of both chambers and the governor's office for the first time in 4 decades in 2022 and will be trying to defend those majorities. So there's what's happening in Michigan. Let's get to our next story. This is John Hanna writing for the Associated Press, dated August 7th. Let's get to Kansas. This is out of Topeka. A former Kansas Attorney General and failed candidate for governor has found at least initial success in his political comeback attempt, winning Tuesday's Republican primary for an open U.S. House seat. Former Kansas Attorney General Derek Schmidt prevailed in the primary in the 2nd District of Eastern Kansas over Jeff Kars, a former top regional federal health official, and Sean Tiffany, a rancher. Even though Kars worked in Donald Trump's administration, Schmidt won Trump's endorsement. In the Democratic primary, former U.S. Representative Nancy Boyda, who held the 2nd District seat in 2007 and 2008, defeated Matt Kleinman, a public health advocate who was a member of the 2008 national champion University of Kansas men's basketball team. Boyda won the nomination even though she riled up some party activists by positioning herself toward the political center for what she saw as a more viable general election campaign in the Republican-leaning district. She lost her 2008 race for re-election. Messages seeking comment were left with both Boyda and Kleinman. The district's 2-term GOP incumbent Jake LaTurner was not seeking re-election. Boyda was the last Democrat to represent eastern Kansas in Congress, and the district became redder after the Republican-controlled legislature redrew it 2 years ago. Schmidt, who is also a former state senator, raised the most money of any candidate, more than $616,000, including more than $119,000 since mid-July, according to campaign finance reports. In a statement, Schmidt said, quote, "America needs more effective conservative voices in public leadership. I will continue to prioritize securing our border, stopping inflation, and rolling back big government's overregulation and overtaxation of our daily lives." End of quote. Schmidt narrowly lost the governor's race in 2022 to Democratic Governor Laura Kelly, and even though he embraced conservative causes in his 3 terms as Attorney General, he continued to face criticism from the right. Kars suggested in mailings that he was not tough enough on illegal immigration, for example. Besides Trump, Schmidt had the backing of Americans for Prosperity, or as we call them on this show, assholes fucking the poor. Part of the political network of billionaire Wichita businessman Charles Koch and his family, the group can mobilize scores of low-tax small government activists in Kansas. Liz Patton, the group's senior Kansas advisor, said in a statement, quote, "Kansas voters once again saw through the political attacks and made the right choice." End of quote. Yeah. Nope. Republican voters were also settling contested primaries in 2 other districts where incumbents are seeking election. In the 1st district, which includes western Kansas, 2-term U.S. Representative Tracy Mann prevailed easily over Eric Bloom, a farmer and real estate investor. Mann's Democratic opponent in November is Paul Buskirk, an academic counselor and advisor for student athletes at the University of Kansas. It's considered a safe Republican seat. In the Kansas City area 3rd District, Dr. Prasanth Reddy, an oncology and internal medicine specialist, defeated small business owner Karen Chernkovic for the right to challenge 3-term U.S. Representative Sharice Davids, the only Democrat in the state's congressional delegation. Davids made headlines with her 2018 election as a lesbian, Native American, and former mixed martial arts fighter. There also were contested primaries in some of the 40 state Senate and 125 state House districts and for offices in Kansas's 105 counties. Polls remained open across the state from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. local time. Johnson County, the state's most populous, which includes the Kansas City area, had perhaps the most notable race. Sheriff Calvin Hayden, seeking a 3rd term, lost the Republican primary to one of his former undersheriffs, Doug Bedford. Hayden received national attention for embracing election conspiracies and keeping an investigation of fraud allegations open at least 2 years without any criminal charges resulting. In November, Bedford will face Democrat Byron Robertson, a suburban city police chief. In the 2nd Congressional District, many Republicans saw Schmidt as the leading candidate even before Trump's complete and total social media endorsement, thanks to Schmidt's name recognition. Trump called Schmidt, quote, an America First patriot, and added, quote, he will never let you down, end of quote. Yeah, but Trump will let you down, him and that pig anus of a mouth that he has. Still, Kars boasted that Trump chose him to be a regional director at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and was a district director and senior advisor for LaTurner. Kars' campaign touted him as a conservative warrior. During a candidate forum broadcast by Topeka Area Public Television KTWU, an event that Schmidt skipped, Kars said, quote, I'm the only tested conservative in this race, end of quote. Tiffany ran as a political outsider, often donning a cowboy hat during public appearances. In a mid-July forum on WIBW-TV in Topeka, he said that the, quote, radical left, end of quote, has attacked the American dream and that, quote, career politicians have done nothing to stand in the gap of our behalf, on our behalf, end of quote. Yeah. In the Democratic race, Boyda supported LGBTQ plus rights generally, but said she opposes allowing transgender girls and women to play on female sports teams. She also called on President Joe Biden to end his race for re-election the day after his disastrous debate performance, well before other Democrats. In a KTWU TV forum last week, Boyda defended running a center-oriented general election campaign from the start. She pointed to Democrats' 10 losses in a row since her lone 2006 victory. 8 were by 14 percentage points or more. She said, quote, quite honestly, a lot of the 2nd District is not going to trust a Democrat going to Washington, D.C. They want to make sure that you are moderate and that you are independent, end of quote. But Boyda's stance on transgender athletes drew immediate criticism, with Kansas Young Democrats calling it disgraceful on X. Kleinman, Boyda's opponent in the primary, said during last week's forum, quote, I believe the Democrats deserve to have a voice. Some of the bravest people I know in Kansas are Democrats in a very red district because they're fighting for Kansas values, and that's the values I want to defend in Congress, end of quote. So there's the wrap up on what happened in Kansas. Let's get to our next story. Let's get to Missouri. This is Summer Ballantyne writing for the Associated Press. This is dated August 7th out of Columbia, Missouri. Missouri voters have nominated Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe to be the Republican candidate for governor, making the governor's race his to lose. Speaking to a crowd of supporters in Jefferson City, Kehoe described himself as an underdog and said people doubted his campaign from the start. Kehoe said, quote, we proved once again the American dream is still alive, end of quote, really. Yeah. Keogh edged out Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft and State Senator Bill Eigel to win the Republican nomination, a huge advantage in a strongly conservative state currently without any Democratic statewide officials. Keogh will face off in the general election against State House Minority Leader Crystal Quaid, who won the Democratic nomination. She immediately framed herself as a champion of reproductive freedom and access to abortion in a Tuesday statement, linking her gubernatorial bid to a November ballot measure that would restore abortion in the state. Abortion is currently banned in Missouri at all stages of pregnancy with limited exceptions. Quaid said, quote, Missourians deserve a governor who will fight for working families, a leader who will restore our rights, not strip us of them. Missourians are sick of the extremism, sick of the government overreach of their rights. End of quote. You got that right. Republican Governor Mike Parson is banned from seeking re-election by term limits. Here's a breakdown of Missouri's top statewide Republican primaries. First, for governor, the Republican fight for the governorship had appeared to be between Ashcroft, who comes from a Missouri political dynasty, and Keogh, a powerhouse in fundraising who was endorsed by Parson to be his successor. Ashcroft had considerable name recognition after serving as Secretary of State since 2017. His father, John Ashcroft, served as Missouri governor, a U.S. senator, and U.S. attorney general under former President George W. Bush. But Ashcroft performed poorly Tuesday, coming in third after Eigel, who has only ever won election to his suburban state Senate seat. Ashcroft spokesman Jason Rose said in a text, quote, this is obviously not the result we expected, end of quote. He said Ashcroft called Keogh to congratulate him and offered his support. Keogh and his supporters had poured money into his campaign and advertisements to make up for Ashcroft's lead in name identification. Roughly a week before Tuesday's primary, his campaign reported raising $4.2 million over the election cycle, more than 3 times what Ashcroft raised. Pro-Keogh Political Action Committee American Dream PAC also brought in more than $7 million, more than double the close to $3 million raised by Committee for Liberty, which backs Ashcroft. Keogh assumed the lieutenant governor seat in 2018. He was appointed to the position following a government reshuffling when former Governor Eric Greitens resigned in the face of potential impeachment that year. Mike Parson was serving as lieutenant governor but ascended to the governor's office when Greitens left. Parson then tapped Keogh to replace him as lieutenant governor. Keogh had been serving as the second highest ranking state senator at the time. Keogh was first elected to the state senate in 2010 after years as a car dealership owner. Oh, used car salesman. Yep, fits right in with politicians. As majority floor owner, he oversaw legislation that restricted unions that Republicans said would help local businesses. As Lieutenant Governor, Keogh oversees work in the GOP-led state Senate, where Republican infighting played out dramatically this year. On Tuesday, he called for unity. Keogh said, quote, this campaign has also exposed some deep divisions within our party, so let me say this. The future of Missouri is too important for the Republican Party to be reduced to finger-pointing and name-calling, end of quote. For Attorney General and other statewide seats, Attorney General Andrew Bailey fought off a challenge from Trump lawyer Will Scharf to clinch the Republican nomination and presumably keep his seat. Tuesday was voters' first chance to weigh in on Bailey, another Parson appointee named to the position after Eric Schmidt resigned to become a U.S. Senator in 2022. Big money groups with connections to key Republican campaign financier Leonard Leo had backed Scharf. Both candidates take conservative positions, but Bailey has gone through the Missouri political system while much of Scharf's career has been in Washington. Secretary of State Ashcroft's and Lieutenant Governor Keogh's political ambitions leave their seats open and have drawn supersized fields of Republican hopefuls. In the Republican race for Secretary of State, State Senator Denny Hoskins defeated State Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman, State Representatives House Speaker Dean Plotcher and Adam Schwarden, Greene County Clerk Shane Scholler, and political newcomers Jamie Corley and Valentina Gomez. It was too early to call the Lieutenant Governor's Republican primary race Tuesday, with David Wazinger and Lincoln Ho leading. So there's what's happening in Missouri. Let's get to Washington State. This is Hallie Golden writing for the Associated Press, dated August 7th, out of Seattle. Washington State's longtime attorney general and a former sheriff known for his work hunting down the Green River Killer advanced Tuesday to November's general election in the battle to become the next governor in a Democratic stronghold that hasn't had an open race for the state's top job in more than a decade. In high-profile congressional races, meanwhile, Democratic U.S. Representative Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez advanced in the 3rd District and will face Donald Trump-endorsed Joe Kent, whom she defeated 2 years ago. And in the 8th District, Democratic U.S. Representative Kim Schreier will go head-to-head against Republican Carmen Gores, a commercial banker. A congressional race in the 4th District between U.S. Representative Dan Newhouse, one of the last remaining House Republicans who voted to impeach Trump, and 2 conservative rivals endorsed by the Republican presidential nominee, was too early to call. Under the state's primary system, the top 2 vote-getters in each of the contests advance to the November election regardless of party. Because Washington is a vote-by-mail state with ballots due to be postmarked by Election Day, it often takes days to learn final results in close races. So here's some of those races. First, for governor, Bob Ferguson, a Democrat who has served as Attorney General since 2013, went up against more than 24 candidates in the primary. He will face former U.S. Representative Dave Reichert, a Republican, in November. The race has featured weeks of intense sparring between the 2 rivals. Reichert said in a statement, quote, "Washington voters have sent a message that they are ready for a change. I am thankful to all who voted for me in this primary." End of quote. In a state with a reputation as solid Democratic territory that hasn't had a Republican governor in nearly 40 years, any conservative candidate faces an uphill battle, but the race is considered competitive. In the 3rd Congressional District, Gluesenkamp-Perez made it through the primary in the 3rd District, advancing to what is expected to be one of the tightest general elections in the U.S. She'll face off again against Kent, a Republican and former Green Beret who has called for the impeachment of President Joe Biden. Gluesenkamp-Perez said in a statement, quote, "Southwest Washington rejected the divisive extreme politics of Joe Kent 2 years ago. We rejected them again tonight. We will reject them in November, and we will stop Joe Kent from using our seat in Congress to promote his online attention-seeking behavior and his angry, hateful, dangerous worldview." End of quote. 2 years ago, Gluesenkamp-Perez came out of nowhere to win the congressional seat in a district that hadn't been in Democratic hands for over a decade. She took over a seat held by a more moderate Republican who lost the primary in part because she voted to impeach Trump after the January 6, 2021 traitorous insurrection. I added traitorous because that's what they were, are, and always will be. They are traitors. Gluesenkamp-Perez supports abortion access and policies to counter climate change, but also speaks openly about being a gun owner. Meanwhile, Kent says Gluesenkamp-Perez only pretends to be a moderate. During a live stream on the social platform X, Kent told enthusiastic supporters that Trump called him on election night. He said, quote, "He wanted me to tell you guys thank you so much for all the hard work you did getting me here. He appreciates you guys. I really appreciate all of you." End of quote. Donald Trump doesn't appreciate anybody. He's in it for himself, period, end of story. He wants to be a dictator. If he wants to be a dictator that bad, he should move to Russia and live under Putin and kiss his ass. Really, he does. He needs to do that. In the 8th Congressional District, Schreier and Gores advanced to the November general election in the 8th District race. Schreier said in a statement, quote, "The people of the 8th District have seen how I have delivered for them and know I will continue to fight to bring down costs, ensure everyone feels safe in their community, and make roll the law of the land." End of quote. Gores is a commercial banker running to tamp down inflation and cut back on crime. Schreier, a pediatrician, has showcased the 14 bills she's had signed into law by Trump and Biden. In a statement, Gores said, quote, "We need a change, and I'm excited to work with you to bring that change to our district and state." End of quote. Yeah. The district is a mix of wealthy Seattle exurbs populated by tech workers and central Washington farmland, and until 2019 had been held by the Republicans. In the 4th Congressional District, Newhouse's bid for a 6th term has meant going up against Trump-endorsed candidates Jared Sessler, a Navy veteran, and Tiffany Smiley, a former nurse who entered the race after losing to U.S. Senator Patty Murray 2 years ago. Trump's backing for Sessler came months ago, while his endorsement for Smiley happened 3 days before the primary, marking a unique, though not unprecedented, dual endorsement by Trump. Newhouse is one of the last remaining House Republicans who voted to impeach Trump. His opponents believe that vote is a huge liability, but political experts caution it's difficult to say whether the endorsements will sway voters who already stuck with Newhouse 2 years ago. Newhouse is endorsed by the NRA and the National Right to Life, and he has mostly steered clear of the subject of Trump. He's instead focused on agriculture and border security in a state with millions of acres of pastures, orchards, and cereal grain lands where immigrant labor is extremely important. So there's what's happening in Washington State, and that's going to wrap up the election stuff. Let's get to our next story here. This is Lexi Lonis writing for The Hill. This is dated August 4th. Educators in Oklahoma are refusing a state order to incorporate the Bible into their lesson plans, setting up an inevitable showdown with the start of the school year just weeks away. Ryan Walters, the State Superintendent of Public Instruction and multi-time winner of Douchebag of the Week on this show, last week released guidelines to schools for how they should be integrating the Bible into classrooms, saying educators who are against the initiative, quote, will comply and I will use every means to make sure of it, end of quote. The message from some schools in the state, bring it on. Rob Miller, superintendent of Bixby Public Schools, said, quote, I suspect that the first thing that will happen is he will target a specific school district or multiple school districts who he believes are not complying with this directive. Those school districts will then have to make a choice as to whether to bend to his whim or to sue, end of quote. Miller added, quote, and I can tell you that if Bixby was one of those schools that he selected to come after, we would file a lawsuit, end of quote. Walters' guidance, which follows a June announcement of mandatory biblical curricula for grades 5 through 12, says that lessons on the Christian text should emphasize its historical context, literary significance, and artistic and musical influence. It's a book of fiction! We're going to have the historical context of a book of fiction. What's next, J.K. Rowling? Really? The guidance also says that a physical copy of the book should be in every classroom, along with copies of the Ten Commandments, the U.S. Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence. No, they want just the Bible and the Ten Commandments. They use the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence for toilet paper. I'm just telling you bluntly, folks. I don't care if my blunt list gets me kicked off of every single Pacifica affiliate. I'm going to be blunt, period, full stop. Lee Northcutt, superintendent of Caddo Public Schools, in an email said, quote, or maybe it's Caddo Public Schools, C-A-D-D-O. He said, quote, to date, schools have been advised by legal counsel, school board association, and state attorney general to not follow the guidance because it goes against current Oklahoma state law, end of quote. The day the guidance was released, a lawsuit was filed against Walters by Joseph Price, a resident of Mays County. Price says in the suit he is a concerned citizen and parent of children attending public schools in Oklahoma, adding that the order violates the separation of church and state. In a statement to The Hill, a spokesperson for Walters said, quote, Oklahoma school districts are required by state law to teach the historical significance of the Bible. Superintendent Walters will hold teachers and administrators accountable. Rogue left-wing activists who refuse can leave Oklahoma and go to California. End of quote. No, left-wing activists should march right on Oklahoma, right into his office and carry him out and let him face the charges. That's my thought. Hey, I'm sorry. Popper's paradox of tolerance. If you tolerate the intolerant take over. But the Oklahoman newspaper reports that at least a dozen school districts in the state have stated publicly that they do not plan to comply. Miller said, quote, "I would tell my teachers to just keep doing what they're doing, teach the Oklahoma academic standards. Don't worry about some of the things that are being said at the State Department in terms of repercussions or discipline or anything else." End of quote. Schools are skeptical of Walters' intentions, especially since religious texts were already included in lesson plans without the compulsory measure. Miller said, quote, "Our history teachers have always incorporated religious texts as part of that full study because it is important to do that, but that's kind of where the line has to be drawn. And his mandate was that we will put a Bible and a copy of the Ten Commandments in every classroom in our district, and with no distinction as to whether or not that Bible is used as an instruction resource." End of quote. Northcutt agreed, quote, "If a teacher wants to use the Bible as a historical reference, then that will be allowed." End of quote. But he added, quote, "As far as forcing teachers to use the new guidance, we will not do so until we are legally told to do so." End of quote. The office of Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt, Republican, did not respond to a request for comment. Schools have become the leading front in the fight over the separation of church and state. In June, the Oklahoma Supreme Court struck down the approval of what would have been the nation's first publicly funded religious charter school, saying that it violates state and federal laws and is unconstitutional. And the Sooner State is not alone in pushing biblical teachings in classrooms. Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry earlier this summer, who is also a Republican, signed a law mandating posters of the Ten Commandments in every classroom, though that measure is on hold as it faces legal challenges. Miller said if Walters decides to move against Bixby Public Schools, he would, quote, "probably hit our accreditation or something of that nature, and then that would go to the Oklahoma Supreme Court, where I am confident they would again support the rights of local school districts to make that choice." End of quote. But ultimately, Miller said the goal may be to garner headlines and get the mandate before the conservative-leaning Supreme Court. He said, quote, "I believe that's what the state superintendent intends because he has voiced this out loud, is that he would like to be sued because he would like to see this issue move through the court system to the United States Supreme Court, where I think there's a faction of people who believe that the current composition of the U.S. Supreme Court might be favorable toward this type of policy." End of quote. Yeah, he's got that right. That's exactly what Walters wants to do, is get this in front of the Supreme Court, and it's ridiculous. All right, we've got one final story that we want to get to, and this does have to do with abortion. We've talked about it a little bit on this show. This is Jeff Mulvihill and Kimberly Cruzy writing for the Associated Press. This is dated August 7th. Listen to this, folks. The number of women getting abortions in the United States actually went up in the first 3 months of 2024 compared with before the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, a report released Wednesday found, reflecting the lengths the Democratic-controlled states went to expand access. A major reason for the increase is that some Democratic-controlled states enacted laws to protect doctors who use telemedicine to see patients in places that have abortion bans, according to the quarterly #WeCount report for the Society of Family Planning, which supports abortion access. Skipping down a little bit, numbers went up in places where abortion remains legal until further into pregnancy, and especially in states such as Illinois, Kansas, and New Mexico, which border states with bans. So there's the gist of it. Abortion almost nil in states that have banned it, going up in states that border states with bans. That's going to wrap things up for this week. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.